Hi everyone, I'm going to present my study on students' emotions for physics experiments. There has been few research which says historical stories are important for students' emotional engagement. One of them is by Corney, who said that stories and theories are not two distinct species but just ends of one spectrum that shows how humans learn. But still there is lack of adequate historical content. In our previous study, we have adapted the Achievement Emotion Questionnaire survey tool developed by Pekroon. Measuring the student emotions with the AEQ, we found significant emotional difference between the intervention, which was a practical with historical story, and control, which was a practical with no history. The lab notes for the intervention looked like this. In the introduction, we had a short historical story in comparison to the black and white lab notes that we generally have for physics practical. So following this study, the research aim for the present study were first, to design the historical stories for a series of electricity practicals, and second was to investigate students' emotions and ideas about the historical story. Historical stories were created for 4 physics practicals using Stinner's guidelines. Our sample was 164 students attending the introductory physics course at the University of Sydney. The data collection happened at the end of the semester when students had done all 4 electricity experiments. And the analysis of the data was done through inductive thematic analysis. We analyzed students' open-ended responses where students reported the emotions that they felt and the reasons behind it. Stinner's guidelines for creating the stories that helped students learn the process of doing science had the first point to capture the imagination of student with a central important idea. Second was to present the concepts that not only related to students' daily life, but also connected them with the concepts explained by scientists. Then it was to invent a storyline to dramatize and highlight the major idea. The history that we presented may or may not be correct. The major ideas should come out naturally from the context that we give to the practicals. And the last one was to connect students to the story that we were creating through romantic relationship, but again going to the precision of the concept and at the end going to the generalization, which were the applications of those concepts. The electricity practical stories were created, where the first one was the one from Galvani to Ohm, where we introduced the electricity concepts to the students. It ranged from 1750s to 1850s, so about 100 years of electricity. This story had 5 of the features from the Stinner's guidelines, where Galvani thinks that electricity was coming from animals. And we asked students that do they think they can charge their mobiles with the frogs? The second one was where Volta presents his voltaic pile to Napoleon, who then makes him the science ambassador. And then we present Ohm, and the practical then naturally follows, because the aim of the practical was to test the relationship between voltage and current. The second practical was on electricity circuits for AC currents. The aim was to familiarize with the oscilloscope and observe the signals. Here we use the famous war of currents. We present the story of Tesla, the employee, being rejected by Edison, the employer, for his ideas on AC electricity. We capture students' imagination. Then we present the dramatic scenario of the fight between Tesla's supporter and Edison and his supporters. In the fight, elephant and prisoners were shocked to death to horrify people regarding the AC electricity. Then we romanticize the connection of students to the experiment by showing the dedication of Tesla to science. Similarly, practical 3 and practical 4 had stories. Practical 3 was about the filters. So we created a story where we talk about the therapeutic usages of single frequency, which started from the time of Hippocrates, who said that torpedo fish shock was helpful for the headaches, to the current scenario where we see in real life the physiotherapy that happens. And similarly for practical 4. The practical 4 was regarding the solar power. So we talk about how at the time of Archimedes, he used the solar energy to kill or to finish up the ships from enemies. And this is how the first page of the experiments looked like. At the end of all 4 experiments, students were asked these 4 questions, where they reported their answers in an open-ended manner. We asked them specifically to circle any of these emotions that we were interested in: enjoyment, pride, anger, anxiety, boredom, and hopelessness. And we asked them why do they feel what they feel, and what do they think about the stories. Do they think such historical contexts help them better engage with the practicals? And when we got the responses, the major response was enjoyment. So students were high on numbers for enjoyment emotion. Students' comments were looked at for the thematic analysis, and comments came like, it's good, the stories are good for my feelings about physics. The greatness of Einstein, I idealize him, so I really like to hear about him. And students like to connect with the historical figures. Again, there was a student who liked that the experiment related with daily life and also talked about the contribution to the society. These comments were seen to be in this category where students found that the story was interesting and helpful. There were few other comments who came into the same category, which were like students found that it was something new, not old repetitive stuff. It helped for understanding the experiments better and to connect with the experiments by knowing what was behind the thing that they are doing. They love the stories, but they find that physics is intimidating. And there were some who just had a quick look at the picture. They don't quite remember if there were any stories, but they liked it. They think it was interesting. Then there were students who thought that stories didn't motivate them. And in general, they were demotivated by quoting that university and life both are difficult for them. There were some students who were just interested in getting the checkpoints. That means just finishing up the practical. That came under the category of not interesting, not relevant. The stories they found were not interesting and not relevant to the practical. And there were few students who thought that it was interesting, but didn't really have any impact on the practical that they were doing. And they were just interested in the knowledge that they required to finish the practical and do the exams. That came under the category of interesting but not useful. So, based on all the students' quotations, these categories were generated, where the first 4 categories were found that regarding the usefulness of the stories, students were finding them interesting and helpful towards learning or emotional engagement, or either both of them. Then there was a category where students found that the stories were interesting but not helpful for learning or emotional engagement. And the other category was the stories were not interesting and not relevant. And then there were few who were not being uh, we were not able to analyze them, and that came under the category of miscellaneous, or there were few where students had issues and comments on labs. So the key findings of the study were that the students enjoy historical stories as an introduction to the physics practicals. And second, students who enjoy the most report that the context is interesting and helpful for emotional engagement. And students who get bored the most report that the context is not interesting and not relevant. Limitation of this study is that it has to be tested over time with different students and different contexts in different countries. I really would like to acknowledge my supervisor Manjula Sharma, Alex Amarian and his team of first year physics laboratory, all the physics tutors and students who helped with the studies, with my study, who thought that stories won't work, but still they hopped along and were part of our study. And my research team, I would really like to thank everyone in the team. Please do connect with me on my email address to discuss or give your inputs for my study. And to know about the AEQ physics like survey tool and the quantitative analysis of emotional engagement, do attend my other talk at ASIRA. Also, feel free to read up the published paper of our research at AGISME. Thank you very much.